Hello, everybody. So today I was tasked with coming up with a question that I would like to answer through kind of like a data analysis and to create some data and answer it the best way that I could. So, when trying to think of something important to my clinical practice, prevention always comes to mind. So, in the world of athletic training, prevention is one of the most important parts of our job. And if there's anything we can do as healthcare professionals to prevent illness or injury, then you better believe we're going to try and make it happen. So there's lots of different things you can look at for preventative practice. One thing that I've always wondered about is the efficacy of uh, myofascial release or kind of manual therapies in that matter. So today I wanted to look at the efficacy of a preventative foam rolling protocol. Since foam rolling is a form of self-myofascial release treatment, I kind of took this as my route of interest. So my question would be, does a preventative foam rolling protocol performed after practice for track athletes during season help prevent hamstring injuries? I remembered reading an article comparing preventative and regenerative foam rolling techniques, and I referred to it to determine what outcome measures I wanted to collect and see how they justified it. And the very first sentence of the article is that impaired sports performance and increased risk of injury in athletes have both been related to the occurrence of neuromuscular fatigue following training. So that kind of gave me a starting point, knowing that injuries occur whenever muscles are fatigued. And in my own clinical practice, I've especially seen this hold true with hamstring strains. So one thing that I wanted to do was see how they measured neuromuscular fatigue, and basically what they did was measure the maximum isometric voluntary force, self-perceived muscle exhaustion, and reactive strength. So as you can see, I kind of modeled my outcome measures to be similar to that. I used max voluntary isometric contraction, perceived muscle exhaustion recorded on a visual analog scale, and a reactive strength index measured by vertical jump height dividing the height by ground reaction time. And then I also kind of took information from what we would take in a health history questionnaire. Does this athlete have a history of hamstring strains? So recording that there. And then was foam rolling implemented? Did they actually do a preventative foam rolling protocol? And did they have a hamstring injury obtained? So basically, my baseline and or T0 and my T1 measurements or postseason measurements were taken baseline before the first practice started and postseason after season has ended. So what I wanted to do was have an equal mix of males and females, or as close as I could get to an equal mix. With 10 patients, I just did 5 and 5. History of hamstring strains, kind of just made up. There's, I would say, a pretty good mix of both. And then using normative values that I just found uh, kind of in other articles, I came up with max voluntary isometric contraction numbers and some numbers of muscle fatigue and reactive strength index. So to answer my question, I had to kind of sit and brainstorm, well, what do these outcome measures mean? So in the article that I kind of referenced earlier, they used all of these before, directly after a fatigue protocol, and then 5 minutes after the fatigue protocol, to kind of see if preventative or regenerative foam rolling would help with activity-induced muscle fatigue. Um, so instead of doing that, I just assumed that, they're always going to get pretty fatigued during practice and stuff. I was just going to see if over time, does this preventative foam rolling help with muscular fatigue in the instance of preventing hamstring strains? So the article came to the conclusion that both preventative and regenerative may have some efficacy in helping with neuromuscular fatigue post-activity. However, more research needed to be uh, done, essentially. So, running the stats that I have here for my kind of mock data that I made up, I got means and standard deviations for both a control group or patients that did not implement a foam rolling protocol and stuff from an experimental group or for patients that did implement the foam rolling protocol. And kind of ran these stats for the mean and the standard deviation. And as you can see by looking at the charts, let me zoom you in a little bit here. Looking at the charts, you can kind of see that there's really not much change compared to each one. The control group and experimental group both had pretty similar uh, isometric contraction force, visual analog scale, uh, recorded self-perceived muscle exhaustion, and reactive strength index. But they did get a little better um, after foam rolling in the experimental group and from whatever else in the control group. And that could probably be, the training that they're going through during the season, the different weightlifting protocols. Obviously, coach is going to do whatever she can to try and get them in shape so that they're not going to be so exhausted after activity. So, for whatever outside variables leading to that, there's not much difference between control and experimental, and you didn't really see much of a difference between groups in terms of did a foam rolling protocol help this. But one thing that I did find kind of interesting after entering my data was the hamstring injuries obtained. So most athletes here did not obtain a hamstring strain after implementing a foam rolling protocol or not. Um, and both patients that did sustain a hamstring injury also had a history of hamstring injury. So my data doesn't really say a lot here to answer my question in terms of does a preventative foam rolling protocol help prevent hamstring strain. Um, but I feel like if I did this in a real life situation, maybe if I were to track several seasons of different athletes coming in and have they had a history of hamstring strains, taking these measurements on them, and then seeing if they did implement a foam rolling protocol or not, and if that did help. Um, Definitely a larger sample size would probably help, and if it was, actual real life data. Um, I feel like that would do a lot more to answer my question. So I think this would be a good start in terms of if I wanted to delve into this in the future. But for now, this is what I got and this is what I found. And I guess my conclusion for my answer would be the data doesn't really show any significant change in terms of if they did a foam rolling protocol or not and if that prevented a hamstring injury. But the two patients that did obtain hamstring injury afterwards also had a history of hamstring injury. So whether that played a factor or not is a mystery. But anyway, that was my assignment for this week, and thank y'all for watching.